Welcome to the Somewhat Creative Show, the podcast where we explore the ideas, tools, and stories shaping the creative world. I'm Clark Miller here with my curious co-host, Rocky Tilney.
Yo.
And today we are guest-free. We have freedom to talk about whatever we want, which means we can talk about anything we want. That's what that means.
Yeah, today's the day. Let's talk.
Let's just get into it. How's it going?
Pretty good.
Yep.
Pretty good. How are you today?
I see a Hawaii based company on your hat.
Yeah, you gotta support the Hawaiian businesses, man.
Rocky just got back from a nice little family vacay to the islands.
We spent a week in Oahu.
That's
and
nice.
It was great.
I got mine coming up in about a month.
Yeah, that's a good time to go.
I feel
Weather's
like
awesome.
I feel like we were talking about what to talk about on this show, and we were talking about like why we do what we do, and I think now it's for vacation. We do what we do so that we can afford to go on vacation. That's the answer to that.
I was watching something. I can't remember. It was a clip on LinkedIn or Instagram. I think it was Bill Maher, actually. And it was from his last show, and I haven't watched it yet. But they were talking about the workforce changing. And I think the guest was saying that and I should have done research on this before I start just blathering on about it.
We don't need any research.
But the idea was that some economist in the 1930s wrote that we would eventually get to a 15-hour work week because of automation and efficiencies and
I've
things
heard of
like
this.
that.
Yeah.
And is that kind of what the life we're going to have, is where we could just work 15 hours and still make the right amount of money that we need for vacations and all the discretionary things we buy?
Didn't quite turn out that way.
I wonder, they said by 2030. I think it was by 2030. So we only have a few more years to go, and then we're going to be home free. We could just vacation all the time, only work 15 hours a week. Everything will be automated.
It's not out of the realm of possibilities. I remember that being something that they talked about when Henry Ford, like I think that was the first big company to do like a set 5-day work week for their employees. Right. Maybe it was even 6. I don't know. But they were the ones to like go, no, people need time off. And I think around that time is when they were talking about like they thought it was going to continue to shrink. Like in a few more years, we'll have 4-day work weeks, and then, keep going down and down. So yeah, a 15-hour work week I would take it. I could get a lot done.
There's a big push for the 4-hour work week, and there's been lots of studies in Japan and
for 4-day.
For the 4-day work week, yeah.
4 hours, I would have a tough time getting anything done, I think.
Yeah. 4 hours wouldn't be enough. But anyway, to your point, maybe if we're just working for vacation, then that checks out with the automation stuff. That we'll be set.
Yeah, I mean, I think if that's if that's why you are making money, and yeah. But I think we also do it, at least I like to think we do it for the joy of like self-expression and not just self-expression, but expressing other people's ideas and brands and that kind of thing. Actually, I kind of got spurred onto this topic this week because I saw a book review by Malcolm Gladwell in the New York Times that was talking about this new book called Unforgiving Places. And the long and short of it is this writer he's an economist, looked at why crime happens basically and where it happens, and just all these, why shootings are in different places and stuff. And they looked at these cities and basically found that most of the crime happens in and around and from just a few specific blocks, like within a neighborhood, and why does that happen? And they looked at a particular area of, I think it was Philadelphia, where they did a program called greening. And part of the greening was designing empty vacant lots to look much more like parks and have art projects. They did murals on the walls. They put in white picket fences, and they put in trees, and they really tried to green all these areas. And they found a significant reduction. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but they found a significant reduction in crime statistics and shootings and violent crime. So they theorized that there's a very strong link between the environment that we're in, our exposure to art and beauty, and our feeling of like, wanting to, I don't know, commit crime or break
Hmm.
free of that, or be depressed. I mean, depression is probably one of the key drivers, I would imagine, poverty
Right.
and depression. So I think it points to, as designers and artists, I always think that we feel like we don't, why are we doing this? Is it really important? Does it really
Hmm.
make a difference? We know we're not curing cancer. We're not the ones on the front
Right.
lines of climate change. I often hope that some point in my career I'll get to do something that's as important as, like,
Right.
whatever it is, designing a logo for the World Wildlife Federation or something
Hmm.
that can help endangered wildlife or climate change, or something like that. But at the same time, I think it's important to reflect on the idea that making things beautifully designed, making things, the experience of art and design in and of itself can be a positive good for the world,
Yeah, I
as
agree.
this
So
book kind of points out. So I don't know. I
I
don't know
think
your
it's
thoughts.
part of the human experience really is to create things and also be feel like you're part of something bigger than yourself. I think that's sometimes when you're in design too, and a lot of creative roles, you feel somewhat isolated. You're either
Mm,
working out a problem by yourself, or you're doing a component of a larger project, but you're kind of on your own on that particular portion. Even if you're working with a larger team, it could feel isolating. But I think it's nice when you do work on a collective project and you're able to ship it as a team. It does feel like you're part of something that's a little bit bigger. When you do stuff that's like culturally relevant or that has staying power in society, that's like I think the ideal project that many designers and creatives would want to be part of is something that's like, oh yeah, we were part of that. I always think when I watch like the NASA documentaries, like all the engineers working on these problems, and they do these, they launched the rocket, they launched the shuttle, but they were part of these really cool missions.
mhm.
And it's like, man, I always think that would be
Pushing
really
mankind
cool
forward.
to be part of something like that was that impactful, some type of scientific discovery. And I don't know if there's quite that type of analogy in the creative world. Maybe
Hmm.
pop culture and stuff. You can look at maybe artists that really kind of moved the needle from a cultural perspective, but I don't think that's something that you'll always get an opportunity to do. So,
No, and I think that's my point, is that, like, I think we often feel like we need those kind of projects, or we are
hmm.
always hoping for that kind of impact on the world. You and I have talked about what are we leaving behind, like what are we going to be remembered for? And to some degree, that's what kind of inspired me about this book. I'll have to actually read it, because sadly I haven't picked up a copy yet, and I have very little time to read because I have two small children that drive me insane. Um, but the idea that, like, art in and of itself, good design in and of itself, can be beneficial for
Hmm.
anybody that comes across it. Like, if you build a beautiful website and it just makes it a little bit easier for somebody to gather that information, or it and has a little bit of a delight factor that makes their day slightly better,
Yeah,
that, we had an impact. Like,
we'll
that's one.
never know. We'll
We'll
never
never know,
know.
but this is saying, like, we kind of do know. We do know that it has an effect on people, right? Like, there isn't a question of does anyone care? Like, is a website that's like Craigslist as good as a website that's beautifully designed and
Yeah.
feature rich and, has lots of bells and whistles? I think
By the same
I'm making
token,
the
if
case that
yeah.
the good design stuff, it makes a difference in people's lives. That's my case.
There can also be, like, the bugs that we don't catch on a website that can make someone's day miserable.
Hmm.
So it's balances out.
Yeah. Yeah. No, and I think,
I don't mean to be a pessimist, but
well, yeah. I mean, definitely you could look at the errors as we're introducing more problems. I think
yeah.
that's why, like, the Craigslist aesthetic and why they've never changed that, and Wikipedia, and like some of these things are just meant to be as low lift and bug free and
Purely
simple to
functional. Yeah.
digest, you know.
And we're seeing actually quite a change, at least just kind of changing the topic to web for a moment here. We're seeing a huge shift in web structure for a variety of reasons. One, Google sort of abandoned their traditional search model. At
Mm-hmm.
least it's beyond just writing on the wall. I think they're actually doing things that are showing that they're going to be leaning into the AI first, um, sort of business. So the traditional organic search is changing. We're not obviously there's not as many clicks. We're seeing a lot of zero clicks happening in the web. We're seeing a lot of people just taking the AI answers or
Mm-hmm.
snippets and going with that and not really diving down deeper. No one's clicking on page 2. I mean, no one did before really either, but they're definitely not doing it now. So we're moving into that kind of that new world of search, where it's more you're actually seeking out answers instead of browsing, responses or results.
Not discovering things, but
You're not really going to be discovering things
yeah.
that way. So AI is going to serve up to us what it thinks that we're looking for,
Mm-hmm.
which is going to be a big shift. Obviously, we're not quite clear how that's going to be navigated. But what's interesting from a design standpoint is some of the older school design that's more like structured and laid out like a document. That's actually more readable to AI than a lot of the really fancy designs that
That's
what
true.
what we're supposed to be designing, creating experiences for, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's weird. We'll see how it plays out over the next few months. But everything's highly structured. Content is super important for search. Schema markup, that's always been in play, but now it's like really, really important to have your site marked up properly, and then making sure your content hierarchy makes sense. All of your site outline, site structure, information architecture. Now all that stuff's becoming much more important than experience from a search standpoint, not an
Yeah.
experience standpoint.
Yeah. From a findability,
Hmm.
digestible for AI. I mean, that's an interesting idea. Like, will we have a, specialist in design that are designing for the AI scanner, AI robot
Yeah.
spiders
Well, it's
that
like
go
this
out?
SEO specialists are now have to be retrained on AI search.
Yeah. I guess that's where it'll kind of go, is like the SEO. That's interesting. Yeah. It's a kind of a bit of, like we talked about pessimism. It's a little bit of a pessimistic outlook on like web design and branding. If everybody's just going to an AI for the answer, and tell me which security company is the best to use for my company, like,
Hmm.
is it just going to deliver the answer, and maybe one or two other ones, and you're not even going to stop and look at their site and be impressed by their branding or anything? I don't know. That's kind of
Yeah,
sad.
and shopping as
Mm-hmm.
well. I think that's actually an area that we could see a lot of changes in.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Product shopping, product comparison, um, price comparison. Google does serve up some prices at the top of their page, which is sometimes helpful. I don't know how that's going to change with AI search. If they're going to do the same thing, or you could just build your own GPT to scan prices on product, right? All the
Mm-hmm.
time, like every week or every day. Tell me the price of this product from 5 sources.
Here's my hope, is that through this process, at least for established designers, the you and I's of the world that are, I don't know, I still have no idea what to tell somebody that's young that wants to get into this
Hmm.
industry, because it's changing so rapidly. But I have this glimmer of hope that for for people like us that are looking at AI, and it's like, are we still going to have projects? Are we still going to have clients? You know, there is a pathway forward that I see
Hmm.
in this industry, where you have agencies like Mischief, that are doing, they started as an agency, like,
Hmm.
doing projects for clients, and they
Right.
they didn't feel like any of them were pushing the boundaries enough. They decided, you know what, we're going to cancel all of our projects and just focus on stuff for ourselves.
Yeah.
And they only do self-generated projects, you know, whether that's like, I mean, they're more of their famous ones are like are shoe bait, like they had the Nikes where they filled it with holy water, like the
Hmm.
sole of the shoe was filled with holy water, and then they just sold like 1,000 Nikes, and Nike sued them obviously
Wow.
because you know
Yeah.
you can't sell somebody's product as your own that
Yeah.
has their Nike branding on it and everything, but it only furthered to increase their visibility and their brand because you know a lawsuit is sometimes any news is good news. Um, and then they of course came out with the Nikes that were the Antichrist Nikes, like the hell Nikes or whatever, the
Jeez.
satanic Nikes, and each one of those there were 666 of them made,
Oh
and
my
each
God.
one was filled with a drop of human blood. So it's like that's crazy,
That
but
is crazy.
they didn't have to rely on Nike to tell them to do that. In fact, it was against, you know, Nike's wishes and
Sure.
everything. And
Sure.
but like that's the freedom to some degree that I see us having in the future is, you know, like we can be more self-motivated, like we can come up with our own projects. I don't know how to necessarily, like they obviously found a niche where they do something so outrageous that people are willing to pay for it and then to buy their products. They also have like purchased famous paintings. I can't remember, a Roscoe or something, and they cut up the individual segments of it and sold each one separately as like an art project. And
Hmm.
it was, you know, it made news because you're cutting up somebody's original piece of art and
Right.
selling it.
Right.
And, you know, I think there was also one where they did, it's, if you haven't like checked them out, it's the stuff they do is pretty out there and outrageous and compelling. But they also did one where they took an original painting. Again, I can't remember the artist, but they made perfect copies of the same painting,
Hmm.
and they put it on the same paper, and I don't
Oh,
exactly, I don't remember
I
how they
remember
did it,
this.
but yeah,
Yeah.
they basically shuffled it all together, lost track of which one is the real original,
Yeah.
and then they sold them for like way, you know, for a total of more than they paid for the original,
Right.
but each one was only like, you know, $200 or something, but they sold like a
But you
thousand of
could get
them.
the original one
So
was the
you could have
idea.
it. No one will ever know because they made
Yeah, it's like
perfect copies, perfect
Pokemon card.
replicas. Yeah, but it's like those are the kind of things that are interesting to me and that show this like glimmer of hope for me that like, you know, even if we don't have clients to work on, we could still self-produce projects and come up with ideas and, you know.
Yeah, what's interesting is that I think the freelancer market will grow. I read something recently that agencies were going to be, well, more specialized, obviously.
Mhm.
Um, but a lot of companies that were maybe doing in-house creative were going to look outside for specialist creative to do, more, more interesting type work, whether it's using AI or not. I didn't see the data on that. I would imagine that's a big part of the push, though, and I think that it's probably going to unlock a lot of new opportunities that we just don't, see yet,
Mhm.
and industries, and build maybe these ecosystems around, creation. Um, so I'm excited about it. I just don't know exactly where, when and where that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of new stuff every day. It's just a matter of like where do you put your energy and effort at this point.
True. It's
That's the
tough.
hard
It's tough
part.
to know. It's tough to know where it's all going.
I have a cool story I want to talk about. I read about this yesterday. It was a LinkedIn post from a guy who's a researcher at, I think, Syracuse University, and he was talking about um, low background steel. Have you heard of that before?
I haven't.
I have not either. It was the first time I heard of it. But here's the story. Before 1945, regular steel was just steel. Like, it was all the
Mhm.
same
Low
steel.
background steel is like a lot lower in the frame, so your background isn't all messed up by the
Exactly.
steel look. That's what I'm
Yeah.
imagining it.
Yeah, there's, I'm
Until I've
sure,
been
a
working on
technical
some
name.
video projects lately.
technical name for this, like I'm imagining. So what happened was in 1945, there was nuclear testing, obviously. So what happened is it contaminated the atmosphere. There was no more real radiation-free steel available. If it was very rare. So for certain applications like Geiger counters or satellites, engineers needed radioactive-free steel, which they call background steel. There's only one place for that: shipwrecks.
Mm.
Essentially sealed off from atmospheric
Right,
contamination.
right. I saw a
Radiation.
similar story to this. I'll tell you the thing I saw after this, but yeah,
Okay.
that's super interesting.
So how does this relate to creativity
Yeah,
and
I
tech?
don't know where we're going with this.
Yeah,
Okay.
it comes together, I promise. So there's a software engineer now that's actually doing that for content. His name's John Graham Cumming, and he launched lowbackgroundsteel.ai. It's basically a time capsule site where he's basically all pre-AI human expression is being archived. So text, code, images, everything that was created before Gen AI models could basically contaminate the internet. So I thought that was super, super fascinating. I didn't know the steel thing. The steel thing on its own was pretty fascinating. Like, wow, I didn't
somebody's
realize
actually
that
doing
steel
this
was
for it.
contaminated. But then to do that with digital content, and it's actually a question that came up a couple episodes ago with Tom, where I posed the question: what happens when, one, we can't tell if it's AI generated? Well, that will happen. It's not if, it will definitely happen.
It's nearly
How
there today.
it's nearly there, yeah. And
I
then
saw
how?
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's okay. And then why, what happens when that hits the historical record? I think that was the question I posed to Tom, and I think we all kind of sighed like, that's going to be rough. So anyway, to go back to this story, it's, we have a lot of synthetic content. And so the idea is like, we want clean human content for research or for whatever, right? We want that retained, almost like a historical archive
Time capsule
of human content. Pre-written languages, there's, everything was oral history before the written word in human history. So this, I always think about, is there ever a type of event that could happen, a catastrophe, on Earth that would wipe out all of our data, all of our historical evidence that we existed? What do we have to show for that? Like buildings, anything like how do we preserve the written word if it's not like carved into a tablet, like the Rosetta Stone or something, right?
Well, even then, someday the sun will explode and gobble up the earth, and we'll all be, every trace of humanity will be wiped from the universe. But
that's fun.
Yeah, just something to look forward to. No, that's interesting. The shipwreck thing is really interesting. This is not about design at all, but it reminded me of a story I heard recently about how they were building a intercosmic, ray detector thing, and one of the things they need for this detector is silver, I believe it was, and it was a similar thing where they needed a particular type of silver that was smelted before contamination or radiation or something else like was involved in this, and there was very little of it in the world. The modern way of developing silver and stuff is it's all polluted with this ionized stuff or what, I can't remember what exactly it is, but they had to go down to a shipwreck, and they found a shipwreck that it was discovered and it had massive amounts of silver on board. They managed to secure, and the problem was like, it's a historical finding. It's a part of history, and they were like imprinted with this civilization's, old king's figurehead and everything. It was like, it was that kind of thing where like, we don't feel good about melting this down and using it because it is a historical record of this time and place. But they managed to find a wreck that had enough of it to where they could take some that, were preserved and take the rest and melt it down and use it for this detector. And it's interesting how I think where it all ties in is like, we don't know what is going to be needed in the future. Like, we don't know what these changes are going to create. So I think preserving as much as we can of what's present now, even if that's like this person is doing, just a repository of all the non-AI digital ecosystem that we have
Hmm.
now. Like,
Right.
it could be, there could come a time when somebody needs something from that period and it would have been erased had it not been preserved. So that's really an interesting idea, thought experiment. Like, what are we going to need in the future? I don't know.
Well, even in like 10 years,
Hmm.
will we need to look back and say what was original content? And we talked about this idea of original content before and how everything is derivative, to some degree. We talked about that with the painters moving to photography, moving to video, moving to digital, now moving
Hmm.
to AI. Is this a natural progression that we're going through from a technology standpoint? Like painting was
Yeah.
technology, I suppose. You had color
It is it is it
pigmentation,
is it a new
science.
tool? Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, what will that look like in 10 years?
I don't
And
know.
then also, like, will artists, designers, any creative, will there be a desire to have sort of this low background creativity
Mm.
as a solution or a service or
I think
a provider?
certainly, right? Certainly, because there's already repository websites for, public domain imagery and
Hmm.
those sorts of things. So I think eventually, yeah, there'll probably be a place for a specific site you go to when you don't want anything that was ever touched by AI, or
Hmm.
I don't know. I definitely think that there'll be opportunities like that. And we've talked about, like, obviously there's a great uh opportunity for anyone that's getting into AI and knows how to use it right now, and can build like an agency, or an illustration house that's just using AI, and there are tons of those popping up here and there, and adopting it, and merging it with other tools. But of course there's going to be a great opportunity to do the opposite, go the other way, and to create your agency that's like
Yeah.
the anti-AI
Right.
agency
Right.
that's like, we don't
Yeah.
do anything that's not created by human hands. And if your company wants to be the company that can tell their customers, like, this is the organic brand, never
Yeah.
touched by the hands of a machine, like, you're going to be able to find that, and that's also an opportunity. So
Here's a question for you though.
hit me.
Do you think there's going to be a point when not using AI, it won't be economically viable, like as a
Mm.
service?
I don't think that there'll ever be a point. I think it's just economically viable on what scale and for whom. I think there is always going to be a niche, a small subset, of any industry that retain, like, if you want to go and make a cast iron pan yourself, like, you can still go out and find an old fashioned blacksmith somewhere. It's like, there's
Hmm.
not a lot of them, but
Sure. Yeah,
there's
like an
still somebody doing
yeah,
it, an
artisanal
artisan.
design.
Hmm. And you could pay $250 and have them
Yeah,
make you like an
gonna cost
original
more, right?
cat, not machine built cast iron or something, or
But
some
here's the other thing,
figurine.
though. Like, no one's ever asked me in the last 20 years to build a website like I built in 1999. Like, no one's. I want you to hand code it in HTML.
Yeah,
No CSS because you
don't
haven't
use
learned that yet.
CSS. Hmm.
Yeah.
I want original Flash animations.
Yeah. No one's ever asked that.
No, true. All right, maybe I'm wrong. I don't
I
know.
don't know.
Maybe then, uh,
This is a
maybe there's no
hypothetical
market
here.
for it. Maybe we'll just get so used to AI being so involved in all of our lives that people will just be like, why wouldn't AI be designing it for us?
Here's another interesting thing. Over the weekend, I was talking to my brother, who's a software engineer, and he said his company asked them to commit 70% of their code with AI. So in
Commit
other
to
words,
building 70% of
commit
their.
commit actually building the code and then committing it to their repo, to whatever software project they're working on.
Wow. What
That's
did they say why? Like, what's the reason to put a
He
number on
didn't.
it?
We didn't talk about that. I would imagine it's they want their software engineers to be as efficient and accurate as possible to reduce bugs. However, that being said, for the last 2 days, I've been trying to get AI to clean up some form code
Mm-hmm.
that was generated by Zoho. It was basically a form capture, and I said, "Can you clean this up? Because it gives me like 500 lines of code for a form. It's like outrageous amount of code for
Mm-hmm.
this form." And I'm like, Can you clean this up? Like, clean up the CSS, clean up the HTML, and then can you make our form fields use best practices for their font size and padding, because they were like really small and they looked like they were from 1998.
Okay. Yep.
It got it wrong every time, or it took liberties in the code and it started
Yeah.
like, oh, we decided to consolidate this and that. And I'm like, I didn't ask you to do anything else. I just wanted the form. And it would screw up so many aspects of the form so I just said, forget it. And I just manually edited the form fields myself, I was really surprised. And this was ChatGPT's Mini '04, which is supposed to be the one that was recommended
Best
for
for
code
code.
and stuff like
Yeah,
that.
that's interesting. That seems like the tailor-made opportunity to use AI. Like, that's supposed to be what it's for, is to
Mhm.
fix and clean up and optimize.
Yeah. So anyway, we're good. So it feels like there's a push for employees to be more efficient and to use AI as much as possible. At least that's anecdotally some of what I'm hearing. That if you're not using that, you're not going to be an efficient employee. You're going to be slower, and probably not someone we want on the team. So use use the code tools the AI tools for this.
I mean, that's one area I just have not explored at all, is like, I've tried to step as far away from coding as humanly possible. It's never been my forte, but I would like to try, integrating it more. And actually, one of the tools, I think I sent you this yesterday, there's new tools coming out
Mm-hmm.
every day that are kind of a mash. They're using AI to kind of smash together the worlds of designing and coding to be a little bit more, tied together.
Absolutely.
I think Figma probably is the closest we've had to
Mm-hmm.
combining those two worlds a little bit more.
Yeah.
I guess you could make a case that, like, Dreamweaver back in the day was kind of the first attempt at a design software for coding, but I think Figma is kind of a step along that line. And now we've got new tools coming out that are, making it so you can design in a space that, using AI easily shifts your designs into code and can kind of, your parallel path it, like it works alongside you. And that's exciting. I mean, that's kind of a cool idea. A great way to use AI is to, I mean, I guess, unfortunately, in a lot of regards, like, cut out your engineer in that sense, your developer.
In some cases, yeah. I think what it's helping do pretty well, at least the initial tools that I've seen, is kind of eliminate the handoff that always happened in design. I'm
Yeah.
talking about web specifically. So, for example, typically when you start a web project, you start with the content. What are we saying on this particular project, this site, and then you basically break it down into a sitemap.
Hmm.
What do we, based on this content and based on whatever this organization needs to say, how do we break that down into pages? That becomes our baseline for information architecture. Once you have that, you could take information architecture and then do a wireframe, which is like a lo-fi, black and white, like,
Hmm.
structure of the page content itself. If you could automate that based on the content, that's like a huge time saver. But I think what you're talking about is that once you get to wireframe, you go from wireframe to design and then design to build. If you
Yeah.
could collapse that into a single step, I think that's going to be huge
Yeah.
for
Eliminating
web
that handoff
developers
at
and
that point.
designers.
Yeah. I think
Yeah.
it's would be really interesting. And, these tools that I'm seeing that can do it. I haven't used them, so I don't know. I can't vouch for how well it's working. But the
Right.
idea of that, the idea of like, let me design a button and it all the CSS and coding and like it all goes right into that as I'm designing it. I mean, that's pretty cool. That's going to be interesting. It's going to be an interesting, few years where there's still humans involved at a lot of these steps, but like the collapsing of like how many people you need in order to go from point A to point Z is going to be
Yeah.
pretty remarkable.
And I think there's one really important thing too to keep in mind, that just because AI automates things and tasks, it doesn't do it automatically. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you still need a human to instruct it, to manage it. So you almost have to think about it as like another person or another part of the team.
Yeah.
So there are management layers to it that need to
Mm-hmm.
happen. There's instruction layers to it that need to happen. I still think even if you're heavily using AI to do, let's say, a web project, for example, there's still going to be a lot of human fingerprints all over the thing, because there's just no way it's going to be able to translate exactly, what you had. There's too many nuances
Yeah.
involved
Well, and
in
we've
it.
already started to see the downside to some of the AI stuff. Like if you don't have that human level of involvement, I mean,
Hmm.
I I can't tell you how many ads and commercials and things people have pointed out on websites in the recent few months where it clearly somebody just like asked AI to make a photo or something and they dropped it in and somebody points out like, six fingers or some weird
Hmm.
artifacting and it just gets by everybody. And,
Is the
I think
six finger thing still happening, or is that a 2024 thing?
it definitely is less and less.
Yeah.
It's still like our go-to like critique of AI, but they've gotten pretty good with the fingers. I mean, I still
Yeah.
see. Oddly enough, I feel like I've now seen more four fingers than, or not, like with three fingers instead of four fingers and a
Yeah.
thumb
Well, you know
lately.
why Walt Disney only put four fingers on Mickey Mouse, right?
Harder to draw.
Well, he also said it looked like his hand was a bunch of bananas.
That's
so
funny.
so that's why the four finger thing exists. Now the Simpsons went four fingers too, for good
Yeah,
reason.
yeah. It's probably easier too. I always had trouble with the fingers and fitting them all in there.
There's always one finger that looked weird.
Mm-hmm. That's
Usually the
true.
pinky. Hands were always difficult for me as well.
Yeah.
But anyway, I think we're going to see a lot of changes in the next 6 months when it comes to these production workflows. And I think a lot of the value we're going to see in AI isn't the generative stuff, the creating of videos and creating images and stuff, although that is definitely going to be part of it. But it's how the interface on top of these
Mm-hmm.
tools and how we interact with them and use them to be more efficient. I think that's really where the real highlight is
Yeah.
going to be with
Yeah.
AI, and that's what I'm looking forward to. Is like how are our tools going to change
Yeah, I
over
know.
time?
We talked about that a little bit yesterday, you and I, offline, and I think it's so true. I think that's where some of the most exciting opportunities are for designers in that UX space. Is how do we make these tools more friendly for people and more control without adding layers of like,
Hmm.
I often see these people that are like know how to prompt and like know how to drop in the right wording and right, different kind of ways to go about how to speak to the AI. And I
Hmm.
think like we're going to get better at building these tools to where you don't have to have the right language anymore. You just the tool is set up for you to, you mentioned this yesterday. Is there a slider that's like
Yeah.
determining the position? Because one of the things that we were talking about was how AI is not great at a original concept or something, or like putting something on, literally taking something and putting on standing it on its head. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's one thing I was saying was like one of the things it's not great at that I've tried to do is like, put a rocket instead of shooting up into the sky, make it like shooting down into the ground or something. Like
Yeah.
taking ideas that there's so much reference material for AI that it's trained on, where a rocket always goes up. Every shot of a rocket is like zooming up into space. If you don't want that, if you want it to like be angled downward towards the ground as if it's going to crash or something, it's like there's not a lot of reference material. It's overwhelmed by the amount of training data that suggests that no, nobody wants that. The AI goes, no, rockets go up. That's what you want.
Because 99% of the visual training that it has is rockets launching. So I think maybe the problem is you, though. I think
Well, it
you
is,
should
but
have
it's also
used.
it's the tool, right? It's like you can tell it all day long, like, no, I want the rocket to be upside down. And it's just going, it goes, but that's not rocket. Then you want something
That's
else. So
missile.
then, yeah, that's missile. That's true. Maybe that is a me problem. Maybe I need to say a missile with space for people to sit on top going down
There you
towards
go.
the ground.
A missile that looks like a rocket
Yeah,
with
basically.
people inside.
Maybe that's the workaround. But I do
That's a
think,
grim picture. What were you doing?
I don't know. I'm sure it was some idea I had that didn't work or something. And I'm using that as an example. It may have been something else. I can't remember. It's like I've always since the beginning, like I've run into that issue of like I want a iPhone that's cracked in half. You know, I want it completely destroyed, cracked in half. And it like there are so many perfect iPhone images out there, and most of them aren't cracked in half, that it really struggles. It's like
cracked in half into two pieces. Or
yeah,
you have
and
to
I
be
haven't
very
done
specific.
that. I haven't done that prompt in a long time, and I had tried a million different ways to get it to give me two pieces of an iPhone or crack it down the middle and stuff, and it just would not want to do it. And anytime it got close, it was still like parts of it were still connected, or it was like two iPhones next to each other and they had cracks. I don't know.
Yeah. Do you remember back in the day when you would have to like budget out in a project time to actually search for stock photography?
No,
Like,
but I'm bad at budgeting time, so I don't know.
We'd have a line item in projects that would be stock photography search. And I remember putting like 8 hours in for some of those because you have to search for them. You have to share those with the client. They have to like, give you the green light on whatever one. It's just a ton of time. And then it's like rights managed versus royalty, versus the, full usage, stuff like that. So it was kind of a pain. Now it's like, do you have to budget time? And I think the answer is yes to this, but budget time for generative AI. So now you could create your own stock essentially, right? But as you alluded to in your cracked iPhone and upside down rocket problem, that took time.
Yeah, it does.
Time is money.
And that's what I was kind of getting to, is there's an opportunity for new layers, as you were saying, of UI on top of these AI tools that will allow people to refine an image, to tweak things without just like saying like, try again, or put a circle around, like everything else, keep the same, but I just want you to try this again. It's like, what if there was a way to use the tools like that Adobe has so well, like object select. Adobe does that so well in Photoshop now, where it can really do a great job of isolating one particular
background
piece. And this is what I'll usually do. Like in that rocket example, like I would now currently what I would do is I'd take whatever image of a rocket, bring it into Photoshop and twist it upside down, right?
Yeah.
Like, it would be so easy to do that.
Yeah.
But what if there was a tool on top of the AI that like, here's all the parts of this image separated out already, and do you want rotation? Do you want size? Do you want like all those Photoshop? Those kind of Photoshop tools that we're so used to. What if that was layered in, and whatever image AI creates, it's already pulled apart. Like it just knows what pieces are where, and it created it. So it kind of can tell, like, it can fill in the backgrounds already. It's all baked into this fictional software that I'm inventing on the spot. And then you can go over to the panels and say like, oh, okay, tweak this a little bit, tweak that a little bit. I want this to be a different color.
Yeah.
All the different aspects of this to really fine grain and like really, and without having to reprompt.
Yeah.
Because it could also be like a huge power consumption issue if you're instead of tweaking the image that you kind of like to get it to where you really want it, right now what we're doing is mostly saying like, try again, try again, try again, and like
Yeah.
reprompting a million times.
Well,
And that's just
I've
using up your
yeah,
credits. It's using up energy.
I've
I don't know.
seen well, Midjourney recently launched the draft mode, which is helpful
Mm-hmm.
because it renders in a fraction of the time and doesn't use as many credits to render the different ideas. And then you could take that one and upscale it, or make changes to it or edit it as you need, which is great because you don't want to. So I would imagine eventually they'll do that with video. But what's interesting is that I've regenerated stuff before, and then it will slowly start to get off course, and you have to like bring it back and train it. It does seem wasteful. Like
Yeah.
the whole AI
Yeah.
processing seems pretty wasteful because there may be some stuff that it could have just retained in the image, and now it's recreating the whole thing again. And so I'm wondering if there'll be like sort of this layering effect happening with imagery that you can kind of reuse. Like, can you imagine if the background was rendered separately from a foreground thing?
Mm-hmm.
And I can see
That's
that
kind of what
valuable
I'm
in
saying. Yeah,
video.
that's kind of what I'm saying.
Like video, like render a scene.
Yeah, I need the same
I
scene in
want the
all four
same
of these.
scene. This is the scene, and then
Yeah.
here's our subject matter in the foreground. They're
Mm-hmm.
just on top of the scene.
And right
But now it's
now,
rendering it all together
yeah,
every single time. And
yeah.
it's like, well, you don't need to render the background again.
Yeah, and we're getting close to that. I mean, there are like within ChatGPT and Midjourney and a lot of these, there are tools for like selecting an area. You know, you can
Yeah,
brush an area, and this is the only area you want to affect. But it's you know, it's just like a single brush layer. It's not like that
it's
precise.
not doesn't feel
Um,
precise. Yeah,
and then there are like reference materials you can give it and say like, this is the scene that I want. But that would be nice if you could just keep the scene, drop in. And ChatGPT, to your point, it's like you can kind of do that, but then it does, the further you go, the more it introduces little hallucinations and changes.
it
And
does. Yeah.
I've seen people post stuff like that where they said it's like a series of images and they put together into a GIF or something and they post it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this person that they had ChatGPT say, you know, just give me a person's face. And then they would say, don't change anything. Can you regenerate it? And they did that, you know, 100 times. Right. And it's interesting to see how it morphs and changes. And by the end, it's not even the same person. Like it looks like
Right.
a cartoon or something.
Right.
It's like how, you know, it's introducing all these little odd
That's gonna
variations,
change.
even when you
I
say
think. Yeah.
it will, but it's interesting that it's like
Yeah.
still you just say just generate the exact same face and it doesn't know how to do it. Like it doesn't know
It
that
doesn't.
I
Yeah.
could just give you, and it could just give you the same image. It doesn't have to regenerate one. It could just be like, well, you just want the same image. So here's
Yeah.
the same image again without me wasting energy.
I think that at the same time Midjourney released the draft mode, they also released a style mode
Mm-hmm.
and a character mode. So if you come up with a character in Midjourney, you can use that character reference
Yeah.
throughout.
Yeah.
And you could also do your own I think they call it mood boards in there. So you can set up all your styles in there ahead of time. You just upload them all, and then it will build like a mood board essentially for you. And it should keep that as kind of like it's a single source of truth. I've seen it vary from the mood board that we're referencing from time to time. It like gets some other influences somehow get sucked into it. But it's
It's almost like
interesting. It's
working
going to
with a,
change though. We'll have more UI
yeah,
eventually.
it's almost like working with a illustrator or designer that has ADHD and like doesn't focus on what they're being asked to do. And
Yeah,
every time you work with them, you're like,
you
man,
get
I like
something
that you
slightly
produce this
different.
stuff so fast, but it's never consistent. It's never
All right,
like,
it's not what we asked.
yeah, this is
I just
great.
wanted this one icon
Not what
change,
we
and
asked
you
for.
actually reformatted the whole document.
Yeah. And they're like,
Like,
oh, I thought that's
why?
what you wanted. When did I say that? I never
Yeah,
said that's what I wanted. Yeah.
yeah.
It's very similar to what I, working with somebody like that. It's
Well,
funny
this
you
was fun
compared that.
because typically we have a guest segment, and our segment in the beginning is like really truncated and short. So I love being able to actually go deeper into some of these conversations
It is
about
nice.
technology and creativity and all that. But
What
coming
I,
up, we do have a full slate of guests coming up in the next few episodes. We're excited about, and it's going to be a pretty wide ranging from wide-ranging creative industries. So that's
Yeah.
exciting.
I know. I'm excited. I think our next episode, we're going to be talking some branding and get a deep dive into the world of branding. And
we have brand strategy coming up. We have interior design coming up, which is pretty exciting. Some agency discussions as well. So some really cool stuff coming up.
I've got a great
summer.
question for that interior design show that we're going to do too. It's called the wrong lamp theory. We'll get into it, but it's
all right.
I want to hear an interior designer's take on this theory.
I have a really hard time with interior design. I don't like. I'm already sick and tired of this background.
Yeah.
Already sick and tired of my gray background.
Well, that's going to always be our problem. Is like we just get tired of stuff too easily.
Yep. I think that's it. That's it. Yeah. So that'll probably be different shortly. Again,
cool.
Fun. Well, anyway, thanks for all of you. Thanks for joining us on the Somewhat Creative Show.
And if you enjoyed the episode, be sure to subscribe wherever you listen. And if you're feeling generous, leave us a review. Give us a thumbs up.
Stay curious, stay creative.
We'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.
Bye.